Hello, this is Sherry Dickhoff, broker manager at Keller Williams Real Estate, and I want to talk to you today about the right way to fill out the BRBC, broker representation and buyer compensation form. Let's get started. Well, it's supposed to be sharing my screen, and I don't see my screen here. Here it is. Well, there we go. All right. So we have the first part, of course, the agency is attached. Make sure you go over the agency disclosure and have your buyers sign this first. Then here's page 1 of the BRBC. You want the date prepared up in the corner, your buyer, your broker, and then we get into the table, the fill-ins. So you must have a beginning date and an end date, and the time for this cannot exceed 3 months. I just heard the other day that they're probably going to change this 3 months to 90 days at the start of 2026, that they're probably going to have the Department of Real Estate regulations are going to change this to 90 days. So don't know if you want to go ahead and get started and be in the habit of using 90 days. Sounds like that's going to change. Right now, 3 months is okay. This form is by default a non-exclusive form. So if you want to go into an exclusive agreement with your buyer, you must check this box in paragraph A2, and then you must explain and have your buyer initial paragraph 15, and we'll get to that. Paragraph B1, you need to complete this also because this tells you what type of a property you are going to help your buyer to find. Right here, I have the single family residence checked. Just look at all of the options that there are and make sure that you check the right boxes concerning what your buyer is looking for and include a location. You can include a county, multiple counties, or you can include cities. If you want to just make the agreement for one property, for instance, but you want that to be exclusive, so you will not be using the buyer showing form that we'll get to at the very end, you'll use this and you'll write in that address, and that way you can use this to make an exclusive agreement because the other property showing form is non-exclusive only. Paragraph C is if there's any additional buyer preferences to attach. Paragraph D, properties excluded from representation. Why would you need to exclude something? Perhaps your buyer entered into an exclusive agreement with another broker regarding a specific property or properties. So you want to make sure to exclude them. Those cannot be included in this agreement, or you will be asking your buyer to pay 2 separate brokers, and you don't want to do that. You want to protect your clients always. Paragraph E, broker compensation. Notice the amount of commission is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiable. Paragraph E, amount of compensation. If you want to get paid, fill in this form. In fact, if you want to get paid, make sure this form is filled out completely and properly, period. The law states that you cannot be paid any more than what is represented in this paragraph on this form if you're using this form. You cannot be paid any more than nothing if you leave it blank. So please don't leave this blank. Come to an agreement, negotiate with your buyer, learn to represent yourself and your value, and have this part completed. Paragraph E2, if the broker receives compensation from the sellers or others, then that amount reduces the amount that your buyer will owe you. Paragraph E3, this is the continuation period. And the reason that you want to put something in here, and I like to put 180 days, this continues their obligation to pay you compensation if within this continuation period, after your deal, this agreement expires, or upon Cancellation, if you provide them with a notice of broker involved properties, and I will go over that at the end also. If you provide them with a notice of broker involved properties prior to um, expiration or within 5 days after a cancellation, and then within that a continuation period, your buyer was to close on one of those properties, this agreement says they owe you your compensation. And you will need to explain that very clearly to them. Make sure they understand that. Paragraph F, if this is a non exclusive agreement, cancellation is effective upon receipt. And then if it's exclusive, the default is the cancellation is effective 30 days after the receipt, but it cannot exceed 30 days. Paragraph G1, time to deliver buyer personal financial information. Your buyer, by signing this, is agreeing to provide you with their personal and financial information. If you want to have them fill out the BFPI at the same time that you're signing this agreement with them, you would check this box, CAR form BFPI attached. And that's buyer's financial and personal information form. By default, they're saying that within 5 calendar days, they're going to provide you with this information. And that includes proof of funds, that includes a pre approval letter if that applies. And proof of funds doesn't just mean proof of enough funds to close on a property, it also includes proof that they have the funds to cover your compensation. If they don't, they need to disclose that to you and check this box in paragraph G2. And then you need to understand that if that box is checked, that means that you have to negotiate for the seller to cover the amount of your compensation. Any other terms goes under paragraph H. And then on the next page goes into advisories, addenda, and disclosure. Broker compensation advisory is attached to this agreement. Paragraph 4 talks about compensation to the broker, that the amount of real estate commission, again, it's negotiable. It's not fixed by law. You will go over the advisory with them. The broker has the right to compensation under this agreement. And then this talks about if it's a non-exclusive, what broker involvement means, exclusive representation and buyer acquisition. This explains paragraph 2A2 and refers to paragraph 15 that needs to be initialed. Part 3 just defines a buyer. Part 4 defines broker involvement. It means that the buyer physically entered and was shown a property by the broker. The broker showed the property to the buyer virtually. The broker submitted to the seller a signed written offer from a buyer to acquire, lease, exchange, or obtain an option on a property. The broker performed a market analysis related to the property, even if you didn't show it. If you have given them advice and done an analysis on a specific property, that qualifies, even if they didn't actually physically go walk through it with you. And then if the property was introduced to the buyer and then the broker acted on the buyer's behalf somehow, maybe calling and getting information from the listing agent, etc. Just showing them, giving them a list of properties doesn't qualify. This paragraph C explains the continuation period. And again, if you have a continuation period and your agreement is about to expire, if you want to give them notice of broker involved properties, you need to do that before the expiration of this agreement. And those properties have to be delineated on this form NBIP, which I will show you. Timing of the compensation just says when the compensation will be paid and how. Once they acquire the property, payment is made through escrow. Again, but the buyer's obligation is reduced by any amount that you will be receiving from any other party, and then they will have to be shown that accounting and where your payment is coming from, either through the settlement agreement or you provide a breakdown for them. But most of the times that's going to come through the settlement statement from the escrow company. Disclosure of payments to the broker. Again, that's what I just explained. Cancellation. If either buyer or broker cancels this agreement, you have to give written notice at any time to the other within the time specified in paragraph 2F. 5B, you're entitled, explains when you are entitled to your compensation. And then it also talks about if within 5 calendar days after the effective date of the cancellation, you give to them a notice of broker involved properties. You have to include that if you hope to get paid within that extension period. Paragraph 6 talks about the agency relationships. Paragraph 7, properties excluded from representation. The buyer needs to inform you if they have signed any other buyer representation agreements. And this paragraph, when you explain it to them, it helps you to remind them that they need to do that. They need to let you know. So make sure you go through this whole agreement with your buyer. It's very important that your buyer be protected from owing two compensations to two different brokers. And if you don't explain this form completely to them, you could miss that. And there may be a misunderstanding with your buyer. They may not realize that, hey, I have an exclusive agreement with another broker on certain properties. I want to make sure you know that. We're the experts. We've got to advise our buyers. We've got to protect them and make sure we serve them well by helping them understand what they're signing here. So if they have signed an exclusive buyer representation with another broker that hasn't expired or terminated, they may owe compensation to that broker. So make sure to delve into that. Buyer discloses that in paragraph 2D. Conflicts with other brokers. Again, this just continues to explain what this means. The limitation on broker representation. If the property is written in as an exclusion, then you will not be obligated any compensation if the buyer ends up buying that property. And you also want to let them know if when you give them that notice after the property is expired, you need to make sure to let them know that if they end up working with another broker, you got to let that broker know that you and I have an agreement involving this list of properties. Paragraph 8, broker authorization and obligations. This is your agreement. You are contractually binding yourself to exercise reasonable effort and due diligence to achieve the purposes of this agreement. You're going to assist the buyer, and this just delineates all of the things you're going to assist the buyer with. You're going to exercise your due diligence and your fiduciary duty to get the buyer what they're looking for. There's no guarantee. There's never a guarantee, but you are going to diligently work for this buyer. The buyer's obligations, they are going to be loyal to you, and they're agreeing that they're obligating themselves to work with you, to negotiate in good faith, to look at properties, consider properties that you bring to them. They're going to provide you with their financial and personal information. And this is where it's explained. Within those 5 days of default or whatever days you write in, they're going to provide you with relevant personal and financial information, including but not limited to proof of funds needed to complete the purchase of the property and satisfy their obligation to pay the broker. And any pre-approval, pre-qualification letters, they're going to provide these to you. If they don't provide these to you, then you will need to produce the form, the financial and personal information form referred to in this agreement. If you can provide proof of funds and pre-approval letter, then we will consider that the documentation that you need for your transaction. If that box is checked in paragraph 2G2 that your buyer does not have the funds to pay you, then they are agreeing to include a term in their offers requesting the seller to compensate you, because this is the only way it's going to work if they don't have the funds. So this explains that to them, and you can explain that to them, what they're agreeing to and what this all means. Paragraph C, reasonable care and other professional assistance. The buyer's obligating to read all the documents, to understand, to cooperate, to work with you, to pay for reports that you order for them, that they've instructed you to order. And they're also agreeing to identify any material issues they have on a property that they're considering making an offer on. They're holding you harmless. They're indemnifying you for any correct, incomplete, or inaccurate information that's provided to you by others that you should not already know because of your position as a realtor. Then we go into attorney's fees, management approval, dispute resolution, just like there are contracts, legally authorized signer description. This is the entire agreement. Then here we come to this paragraph 15, the exclusive representation paragraph. It explains what exclusive representation means, what kind of agreement this buyer is entering into, that they will owe you a compensation if they buy any property during this time period of exclusive representation other than a property that's listed as excluded from this agreement, and how this is going to be canceled. You need to explain this carefully to them, make sure they understand, and they need to initial this paragraph. Buyers acknowledge that buyer has read and understands and received a copy of and agrees to the terms of this agreement. So you need to make sure they understand. If you have an entity buyer and you do not want to complete a representative capacity signature disclosure, then complete this paragraph in full. If you don't complete it in full, even if you check the box and don't complete this paragraph in full, you will still have to complete a representative capacity disclosure form. This only gets you out of that if you fill in all the blanks here. Buyer's signatures, if it's an entity, state their title if it's applicable. And that's it. Make sure you sign it as well. Make sure they get a copy of it. And then we have your advisories, buyer's investigation advisory. They need to understand the importance of investigating the property, understanding any material issues they might have about a property. Broker's compensation advisory, please go over this with them. This is part of the settlement agreement, going over and over the fact that our compensation is not set by law. It's negotiable. This first part is for listings for sellers, and then we get into broker agreement with buyers, requirements for written agreements. This explains why these things are important, why we have to have these forms. It gets into all that. You can help them understand that the seller could pay part of or all of your compensation if they want to go down that route of negotiating their offer, and how that impacts them. Make sure to advise them of that, which I think you guys are doing a pretty good job, but I'm just reminding you here. And then again, here's why this practice has come into being, and the fact that now it is law. This is not just any longer these broker representation and compensation agreements are not just part of the settlement anymore as of January 1st. They're part of California law, and California law says they have to include the start date, the end date, the compensation amount. So these forms were created to help you comply. So please complete these forms in full. Buyer represent, it's a BRBC is included, California Consumer Advisory Act. Here is the buyer financial and personal information form that I've been referring to. This is if the buyer does not provide you with a proof of funds or pre-approval letter. Sorry, a lot of information floating around in my head right now. Then they need to complete one of these forms for you, and you need to turn it in for compliance. So it includes the amount of deposit that they have available, the amount of down payment they have available, where their money is coming from, if they have additional funds, the source, all the typical information they would provide for a lender, and also their lender information if they have one, what type of financing they're going after, and personal information. Do they currently own a home? Are they going to have to sell this home in order to purchase another one? Is their down payment coming from this home? What their real estate experience is, any time constraints they have, the reason for purchase, and others. And then you're both agreeing that this financial and personal information herein is intended as confidential information, and it refers to the civil code. And tells them that they need to let you know should their information change during the time of this agreement with you. Make sure they sign it. Make sure you sign it. This is the buyer identification of preferences and priorities. On the first page of the table that you're filling in on the BRBC with your buyer, and you're identifying the locations that the buyer wants to buy a property in and what type of property, you can check a box that refers to this form BIP. And this just gives more specific preferences and priorities. You can fill out their price range. Again, always put in dates. This refers to your agreement with them, your broker representation agreement with them. Make sure to complete the dates here, starting here, ending here. So you can identify further preferences and priorities to help this helps the buyer in a way. It helps the buyer to know and understand and think about these things and identify to you what it is that they want. And it helps bring you further understanding of what they're after, since you are promising to exercise due diligence to get them what they're looking for. So there's a lot of information they can fill out for you. This is not required. This is an optional form should you choose to use it. Also, before they sign it, I want you to explain this to them and make sure that they understand and acknowledge and agree that you cannot guarantee that any property will meet any or all of their preferences and priorities, and that no matter what they're telling you, you're going to exercise due diligence to find it, but you can't guarantee that you will, and that it's their responsibility to determine to what extent any property meets their preferences and priorities. Okay, please make sure to explain this to them before you have them sign this form, should you choose to use it. This is the notice of broker involved properties. This is the form that you're going to give to your buyer before the expiration of your representation agreement. If you've shown them some properties that they were interested in, and you want to make sure if they purchase these properties within the continuation period, and that continuation period is outlined on that first page, the table on the first page of the BRBC, you have to write in a number of days. It's not any good. You don't have a representation period unless you write in a number of days. I'm going to go back to that real quick because I think I just want to make sure you understand that. Continuation period is right here in paragraph E3 on page 1 of the BRBC. Continuation and right to payment for broker involved properties. You have to write in a number of days here. It's blank. Okay. If you leave it blank, you don't have a continuation period. So if they go off and buy one of the properties you showed them after your 3-month representation agreement expired, you have no right to payment. However, if after the expiration date of your 3-month agreement, they buy one of those properties that you're going to notify them of within the number of days listed here, then let's see, I gotta go back. Here we go. Nope, sorry, one more. If you provide them with this list before the expiration date and you put in the addresses of the properties that you've shown them that you feel like you thought they were really interested in, you think they might buy, then if they go off and buy one of those during that time period in the extension, you are owed compensation. It must be a property that you were involved in. And if you don't understand what that means, refer back to the BRBC. It explains what broker involvement is. And you need to make sure the buyer understands the importance. If they intend to enter into a buyer representation agreement with another broker, the buyer is advised to provide this notice to that broker so that that broker can see you're obligated to pay another broker should you purchase any of the properties outlined here within your continuation period. You will owe broker number 1, which is you, a compensation. The compensation agreed to in your original agreement. Hopefully that makes sense. Please reach out to me if you feel like you need any further explanation on any of these forms. What do we have left here? Okay. That concludes explanation of the BRBC. The BRBC can be exclusive or non-exclusive. It covers a longer period of time. It's got a little more meat in it to it and a little more teeth than the property showing and representation agreement. So you can choose to use a BRBC before showing property. Remember, you've got to have these agreements at least before showing property. But if you are just starting to advise a buyer, you're sitting down and you're helping them get pre-approved, you're starting to walk them through the process and tell them what to expect, and you are acting as their agent, you should fill out the BRBC at that time. Don't wait. If you are acting as their agent in any way other than showing them a property before you even start down the road of showing, you need to have them complete a representation agreement. And that can be the BRBC or it can be the property showing and representation agreement form. This is a shorter form for a shorter period of time for some specifically outlined properties. So again, it doesn't have as much meat to it as the BRBC, but if you want to use this as a starting point, if you're reluctant to get into the BRBC with a buyer, if you just want to, if your buyer just is reluctant to sign one and they just want you to show them a property or two, you do have the option of using this form. And to use this form, again, you need to put in the date prepared, your buyer's name, the broker. You need to delineate the properties that they want you to show them and that you're going to represent them on. You can add more than what will fit on this. You can add an attached list of properties. And this is the broker is agreeing virtually or in person to show these properties identified. Um, the buyer is granting you the non-exclusive right to represent them. This is a non-exclusive agreement only. So please be aware, excuse me, please be aware of the fact that this is non-exclusive and they could go out and date another realtor at the same time. So here we have the table to fill out, the representation period. You must have a beginning date. You must have an end date for this to be valid. It cannot exceed 30 days. So that's the limitation on this form. It's non-exclusive, it's for a shorter period of time, and it's for a specific list of properties. You must have amount of compensation. Of course, that's negotiable. It says right here, the amount or rate is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiated between buyer and broker. So write in your compensation amount here if you want to get paid. Remember, again, the law says that you are not to be paid any more than what is written here. If you have nothing written in here, you cannot be paid any more than nothing. And even $1 is more than nothing. So payments received by brokers from sellers, it explains that it will offset their obligation to pay. Again, we have a continuation period here. So write in your continuation period. Make sure something's included here. Cancellation. Cancellation is good upon receipt. And if your buyer cancels the agreement on you and you have had some broker involvement in showing these properties or advising somehow with a market analysis, et cetera, on these specific properties, within 5 days of a cancellation, you can provide them with that notice of broker involved properties. And if they buy one, you can, they still are obligated to pay you whatever they agreed. Other terms could be written in here. And then again, we go into the explanations, very similar to the BRBC explanations, what your right is to be paid, what the non-exclusive representation and broker involvement means, what the continuation period means, your right to compensation if prior to expiration you deliver the written notice of the properties that you've been involved in, which, going back to this, is this notice of broker involvement. I'm going to pop back over to this form and finish this off. Continuation right. The timing, again, it goes into explaining of the when you will be compensated, how you will be compensated through escrow, accounting for payments to brokers. If the broker also represents the seller, you have to let them know, both buyer and seller know, and who you're getting paid for, where all the money is coming from, how payments from anybody else offset the buyer's compensation obligation. This paragraph 6 covers cancellation. And it says before, during, and after the 5-day period, the buyer is advised. Oh, so this goes up here. It says buyer. If you deliver to buyer within 5 calendar days after the effective date of the cancellation, the notice of broker involved properties, then within the continuation period, they purchase one and close on one, they owe you compensation still. Agency relationships, broker's authorization, buyer's obligations, broker's obligations. Buyers attending an open house without representation. You are not required, so this is advising your buyer. You're not required to sign a representation agreement to see a property at an open house. If you do not want the agent holding the open house to represent you, then you should not sign this form. Okay? A lot of agents holding open houses try to get their buyers to sign one of these forms with their property's address on it. It's telling that buyer you don't have to sign one of these agreements at the open house, and you should read and understand the open house visitor non-agency disclosure and sign-in form. To all buyers, if you've read and signed a representation agreement with another broker, you need to inform the broker of the name of that other broker and provide a copy of that agreement. So you need to ask your buyer, have you signed any representation agreements with any other brokers? Can I see that? Can I see so that I can understand the agreement you've entered in there so that, I'm not crossing that. If you have already signed a representation agreement with another broker and you sign this form, you may be obligated to pay two different brokers. Again, this is an advisory statement to your buyer. Help them to understand what it says, and then have them sign it. And then you sign it. And then it's complete. I hope that helps you understand how to complete these forms, how to properly complete these forms, when you need to complete these forms at the first practicable opportunity. And from what I understand, the DRE is going to be coming out with regulations this year defining what the first practicable opportunity means, and also redefining the length of the time periods of these forms. And it is my understanding that that will not go into, that those have to be approved by the legislature in order to go into effect in January of 2026. At least that's their goal. That's what I hear coming down the pipeline. I wish you all the best. Again, always reach out if you have questions and need more clarifications. I hope this has been helpful.